Hello everyone. For today we're going to be covering three different images that have been posted to the TDU Lighting Student page. We have Martin's first submission of a Boutique 23 character. I believe his name, I forget his name, but he's in our attic scene. We've got Kleber with an update to the dancing light bulb characters, and then we have Ubaid's update to his environment scene. The reason why I'm doing this as a video critique is that there are some common elements that are existing between a couple of the images, most specifically this glass shape here and the glass helmet there, that I thought it would just be beneficial to talk through each of the images with everybody so that we can all be on the same page and we can kind of learn from each other's experiences and learn a few things. So this image is up first. So I will talk about Martin's scene here. So overall, my first impression was that this was looking really nice. I think that you're in a really good place with some of these elements, specifically like these books here in the foreground. I think that's looking really great. There's some nice shaping on there. There's some really kind of, especially like in here, there's some nice spec hits. There's some nice shaping across here. Just some really solid, strong lighting elements going on. The key light, you know what? I was going to say the key light can come down a little bit to make sure that we're focused in here, but I think that's totally fine. I think we're in a really good spot, especially these specular reflections are looking really good. And then if you want, the tone of the pages is very similar to the binding, to the cover. So I think maybe you could lose a little bit of the saturation in the pages. It'll still look dirty, it'll still look old and antique, but it will just kind of differentiate the pages from the book a little bit. But overall, this is working pretty well, but there are some elements that I do think can be improved upon. The first of which is this glass helmet. And I'm going to talk about this glass helmet at the same time that I'm going to talk about Kleber's glass light bulb head here. So there are a couple things going on. And the first is that lighting glass is extraordinarily hard. It is, and you all are dealing with a couple of things, right? There's two surfaces of glass that you're actually lighting through, so your ray depth has to be turned up so that the light rays can pass through both of them. And then there's things like, because when you light a glass surface, you're not actually lighting it with light, you're lighting it with reflection. So it doesn't matter how bright a light you hit on it is, it's about how much that light is hitting the surfaces around it that are being reflected within it. So that's what you always have to think about when you're working with glass. So you'll get an art director note or a director note that says, hey, we need to make that glass a little bit brighter. And really what they're looking for is you to make the surrounding objects brighter so the glass itself gets brighter. Two things that we should talk about with this astronaut glass helmet. The first of which is that I was looking at some reference, so I found some old astronaut footage. I found footage from First Man, Gravity. And one of the things that you realize when you start to look at these is that this glass is perfect. It's astronaut glass. It needs to be perfectly like as smooth and as crystal clear, because this is what the astronauts need to see through. And so you want to, and even when it's this perfect glass, you're still getting a little bit of a touch of kind of glowy edge blur on some of these elements. It's not like perfectly crisp, but it's still reading as a lovely piece of glass. And one thing you need to know about these Gravity images is that these were CG glass helmets. So anytime that you saw a character inside the glass helmet, there was their head was actually CG'd in there, so that they could clear off some of the reflection off their faces, so you can still read the performance. But in the original astronaut footage, you don't really get that. So this is a good example. And what you're seeing is a lot of like the warping around the edges, just kind of like a warbly thing. And the renders that you all are using should allow us to get that a little bit. But one thing about this one is that it feels a little bit, two things. One, it feels soft in the reflections. This one feels a little bit crisp. But when looking at this one, I realized that it's not actually the reflection that we're seeing, it's the refraction. And I think it might be inverted. And what that tells me is when you get a heavy refraction in a surface, it means it's very thick. So think of, like, this is a light bulb that's just the shell of glass, but the amount of refraction that we're seeing, that's actually like inverting the image, because I think that these are now here, if I'm reading that right, and then this light bulb is the same as that, and it's actually like inverted from the refraction. And anytime you're seeing something that dense, this would imply that this glass shape is solid and not hollow. the way that a light bulb is. So when we're looking through a glass shaped like that, you generally kind of see, like, we're not seeing the faces of these guys. They're not warped at all because the thickness of the glass is very small. So I think you need to make sure that you're turning down your IOR, your incident of refraction. Is that what IOR is? And what that'll do is when it's closer to 1, the light ray will pass perfectly through. As the number goes up, it starts to deflect more and create more refraction. So for both of you all, you're going to want your IOR to be set pretty low, and because I can kind of see that his back here is getting fuzzy, and that would imply a little bit of a higher IOR too, which means a thicker glass. But in these astronaut suits, they're going to be very thin. So that's all that is too, and that could be some geometry stuff too. So just make sure your geometry isn't too thick. And then additionally, one thing that's really beneficial to both of you would be, and this comes from lighting glass, what you want to do is, where's a good example? This is a really good example. Do you see how there's like a white kind of an outline on the outside of it? When you're lighting a glass for photography, if you're doing like a product shoot or something, what you do is you set the glass right here on camera, and then you'll put a white card or a black card just off camera, like just a couple inches off, so that it picks up this reflection in the sides of it so you can read the outline of it. Because what happens often is that you will lose the edge, like we kind of lose it in here. And what you want is you just want to make sure to maintain that shape. It's like putting a rim light on something. So one technique is just to go off camera and make some planes or some objects that are only visible in the reflections, and that way you can get some more shaping on the glass surface as well. So a few more things I'll go with Martins and I'll go to Kleber's next before going on to Ubaid's, is so you're getting some nice volumetric light coming in here, and looking at your reference, which is really lovely reference. One of the things that you notice is, not so much in this one because we're looking directly at it, but this one, there's a higher, more thick volumetric rays coming in near the window, and it fades off as you go across. In yours here, it's a little bit consistent, so I would just make sure to amp up some of the volumetric light here by the window and then have it fade off as it goes across the room. The one thing that I noticed about this one that initially caught me off guard a little bit was just how much or how bright this light is. I love the idea of it. I love that light's coming in through this window, hitting this book, and then bouncing up here. It's just too strong. It feels like a light source. It feels a little bit theatrical, like there's an off-camera light shining in there. So I love the idea. I would tone it down a little bit and then make sure that it's like an area light about the size of this book. So it's a little bit bigger in front of him and bouncing up that way, because it looks like the radius might be a little small. I'm just judging by the shadow quality. But you definitely don't want, this is almost brighter than the rim light, and you really want that to be like a secondary light. So I would make sure that the light coming through the window is the primary one, and then make sure that's secondary. Watch out for, let me color sample this. This might just be because it's a JPEG, but if I color sample outside of this window here, you can see there's actually, it's not quite pure white. And what you want to see is definitely some pure white values if we're seeing the sky out there, if we're kind of exposed for the interior. So it's kind of clamped off to a yellowish tone. So I would definitely make sure that you're pushing that to white. It looks like it's okay over here around the tree. Just watch out for that. The other thing you want to determine is whether or not there's glass there. If there's glass, you're going to want to make a little bit of a reflection in there. It's fine that there isn't. It's totally your call if you want to give a glass look in there as well. And then that's pretty much it for this one. I think it's working really well. You could get some more secondary elements. Maybe some more bounce light up underneath here. Maybe some a little bit more shaping on this grandfather clock back in there. Maybe just a little bit more, I guess, more glow kind of coming up from the bottom. And then maybe some darkening as we get up here towards this top corner. But other than that, I think this is working out really well. This is really nice. Oh, this cello, let's say this, up here by the neck, that's feeling a little bit ambient and diffuse, a little bit matte. So I would just make sure to get some specular elements in there as well. Moving on to Kleber's. So another iteration, it keeps getting better. Watch out for these refractions. I would say the other major thing to watch out for is, again, clamped values in here. So if we adjust the values a little bit, like you can see that everything's kind of pushed towards the darker end of the spectrum, which again is not unheard of because it's a very dark scene, but we're losing some top end stuff. So you just want to make sure that you're getting some, and right now I'm just looking in here. You just kind of want to make sure to get some brighter values going up in there, so that we're not losing too much of it. One thing you also want to watch out for too is there's a lot of softening here, and it almost looks like a depth of field thing that's creeping onto this character, so just watch out for that. I love the depth of field of this. I think that's working out really nicely, but I think that it's just becoming a little bit too much. And then this might be a pose thing, but just double check that that scarf isn't coming through her hand. It almost looks like it's poking through it, like right there. So that would be something that I would watch out for. And then if there's anything else, I think that's pretty much it. But I think this one's coming together well. I know you're showing the iterations. Don't be down about it. It's like this is a long. Looks easy, but these light bulb characters are very, very tricky. And the one thing I might want to consider too is just backing off some of the saturation on these blue, like these super blue cyans. Maybe some of these magentas too. Let's see. Just something like that. I think you can still get the saturation without going too over the top with it. I might be dialing it back too much, but somewhere in there, I think would be more of a. I think that would be a nice little color palette. But overall, things are looking pretty well. Just watch out for, you've got some good shaping. Maybe a little bit more of this light's influence on this side of her body, not so much on her dress there, but like on her skirt part, but like right here on the main torso area. But other than that, I think this is looking really well. I think that you're keep progressing in the right direction, and I think we're going along well. So obeyed. We are making a lot of progress on this. I wanted to start by showing you where we started to where we are now. And I know that we're still building stuff back in. And I just want to show from the last iteration to now, just to kind of make sure. It looks like it's really good because we're losing some of these lights that are kind of coming in from off screen. I do really want to focus in on just these, again, just making sure that we're getting the street level stuff going. So if you could, and I know I'm being a pain about this, but I really think that it's going to really help us, is just go ahead and turn off all these surrounding lights, like whatever light is happening up here, the lights back there, these interior lights, for just for now. I promise you we're going to get them all back on, all these lights over here. And then if there's still any ambient light that's hitting, because like this building feels bright, these buildings still feel like they're getting some sort of sky dome. It's all coming back, even if you want to make a separate file, because I really want to lock in these street lamps because they're hard, again. And you're going to hear me say this a lot as I'm going through these critiques, but these elements are tricky. Like, they're certainly not easy. And that's why you kind of need to take a step back. And I know I did this when I was first starting. I would try and do everything all at once. And you really need to just like pace yourself through it, make sure the street lamps are looking good. Then we'll move on to the interior stuff. And then maybe we'll add in some environment stuff. Then we'll add the deep background stuff. Then we'll add the fog. Then we'll add the volumetric. And I know it feels slow, but unless you build it that way, in this kind of structurally sound way, unless one piece is good before moving on to the next one, the problems compound. So, like there'll be a little bit of extra light here, but then you add this one, and then when you're adding this light, you keep that light lower, so this area doesn't get right. But really, what ends up happening is the rest of it gets kind of janky. So you really want to make sure that every element is right before moving on to the next. Okay, so for this one, I'm still seeing and what I'm looking at is like, look at this reflective surface right there, right? If we're thinking about a roadway being reflective, and maybe being a little bit like, think about a wet brick. So we would still feel these ridges, like there would still be lines kind of cutting through where it's down in the grout of the brick versus the individual brick elements. So we'd still feel like this same type of pattern broken up in the specular as well. And what we're seeing is a totally kind of a flat, smooth surface. There's no textural bump style breakup. So what you want to do is there's a couple things that you can do. One is that you can add some bumper displacement to the actual geometry, to the shader of the geometry, and that will break up the specular highlight. The other thing that you can do is that you can create a map for the specular highlight. And what I mean by that, I didn't prepare this, but you can, let's say, normally, like think of the specular value of a shader. It starts off, and it's a little misleading because it's just a color, it's like a black to white kind of a thing. And you can turn it up and down and it's more or less, right? And you think of it as being like the overall specular value. But you can actually map in, depending on what software you're using, you can map in an image that's some black and some white. And what you can do, like let's say I had a texture map and I wanted like some of it to be reflective and other areas not to be. So what you would do is you create a black and white image where the white areas are where you want the specularity and the black areas are where you want no reflectivity. And then you plug that in to the channel, the specular channel, like the normal black to white one. And what you can get is you can get some specular in some areas and not in others, and it makes it look like it's breaking up. Now, if you have a texture map already laid out of the brick, what you would want to do is take that into Photoshop and make a black and white image out of it, and then modify that image so that the white areas are the brick surfaces where that's where it's going to get reflected, where in the grooves it's not. And that'll just help break it up a little bit and help make it look a little bit different. So that's what I would recommend there. Again, I'm still seeing like it's just a color difference between these two surfaces, right? Like this brick and this are going to be roughly the same surface, right? Maybe this is a little bit darker, but tonality wise, they're going to be similar. That this one's coming out more like that these pockets here are more blue versus what we're seeing in the sidewalk. It feels wrong, right? Like it just feels like they're two different, like there's definitely two different lights hitting the two different surfaces. So, and I know you said before that was a color correction that you were doing, so make sure to pull that off. The other thing that throws that off is that the black point of this roadway is now very different than this carriage. So this carriage, zoom in on it. This carriage is dark, but the shadows on the road are much brighter or much more lifted in value. So what you want is you don't want that. You want your black points to fall in line as you're moving back through the space in Z depth space. So a lot of that being said, so I just want to take off all color corrections. I want to take off the light linking again to just focus in on these street lamps, because I think their look is looking great. Like they're getting right on where we need them to be. We just need to dial in the color a little bit, and then we'll move on to adding in the sky or the other elements. I think that's what we'll do. I think we'll start with getting the color of the street lamps right. Then we will just do like a sky map or an HDRI map or something to get it into place. And then we'll start adding all of these secondary lights. Then we'll start adding the interior lights. And then only after that will we determine if we want to do any color corrections, light linking, any sort of specialty things to it. Because what happens is if you start doing that right out of the gate, you're going to get disjointed things going on in the image. So I know we've gone through several iterations on this, but I want you to keep pushing, and I'm sorry to make you do this, but I really, really, really think that this is an important process for your learning to understand and to keep moving forward. So that's all I have for today. If you all have any questions at all, just please let me know. You can add them here to the lighting group, or you can email me at headmasters@td-u.com. But until tomorrow, happy lighting, everybody.